Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome to Farage. I'm Mark Steyn in for Nigel. 'Twas the night before Christmas, and we're already scraping the bottom of the barrel for guest presenters. God knows what we'll be down to by Christmas Bank Holiday Thursday. Tonight, a vicar pushes back against the COVID commissars. Plus, all I want for Christmas is a scorpion and a second-hand umbilical cord. And I'll be talking pints with Lord Dannett, former Chief of the General Staff. And of course, the indispensable part of the show, as always, your thoughts on what we're talking about and what we're not talking about. Send them along to gbviews at gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at gbnews. That's all straight ahead. But first, here's Polly with the news.
Mark, thank you. I'm Polly Middlehurst, and these are your latest GB News headlines. The number of confirmed daily COVID cases in the UK has reached 6 figures for the first time since the start of the pandemic. Government data shows 106,122 lab-confirmed cases have been recorded in the UK in a 24-hour period. In the same time frame, 140 people died within 28 days of testing positive. Separate figures published by the Office for National Statistics show since the start of the pandemic there have been 173,000 deaths in the UK, where COVID-19 was mentioned on the death certificate. Meanwhile, in Wales, the Welsh Government is bringing in a series of new COVID restrictions from Boxing Day. 2-metre social distancing will return to workplaces and public venues. The rule of 6 and face coverings are also being brought back in pubs, restaurants, cinemas and theatres, and there'll be a limit on the number of people allowed to attend events, with 30 people allowed indoors and 50 outside. And in Northern Ireland, they're going to close all nightclubs from 8 p.m. on Boxing Day. The public will be urged, but not mandated, to stick to the 3 households rule indoors. Ministers also agreed that sporting events can continue with no limits on capacity, while social distancing will be implemented in the workplace. That comes on the same day that the region recorded its highest daily increase in numbers of the virus. And a new version of the Pfizer COVID jab has been approved for use in children in the UK. The Medicines and Healthcare Agency gave the green light to the jab for 5 to 11-year-olds who are at risk, or for those who are in contact with vulnerable people. Further advice regarding vaccines for other children is expected in due course. And the Welsh Health Minister has said it will implement a rollout of COVID vaccines for at-risk children early next year. Now, away from COVID, a deputy head teacher has been jailed for 13 years and 4 months at Liverpool Crown Court for child sex abuse offences, including 2 counts of rape. Julie Morris admitted filming herself and her partner raping a girl under the age of 13. The 44-year-old had been the safeguarding lead at her school in Wigan in Greater Manchester. The offences don't relate to her job, but it's understood she sent photographs of pupils at her school to her partner, David Morris. In other news today, an exquisitely preserved embryo has been found inside a fossilised dinosaur egg. Discovered within rocks in southern China, the egg is believed to be up to 72 million years old and belongs to a toothless type of dinosaur. It can be seen in the tucking position, the fetal position, previously thought to be a pre-hatching behaviour of birds. Scientists are excited by the discovery, of course, which at 27 centimetres long is among the best preserved specimens ever found. You're up to date? Let's get back now to Mark.
Yeah, that dinosaur's going to be rampaging through the streets in a couple of weeks. You heard it here first. It's 2 days till Christmas, when we celebrate the birth of Jesus, who was born in a stable because his mother didn't have the vaccine passport you need to get into the inn. Is that right? As the years roll by, the details grow hazy, because in the last 2 years there's been a great absence of the church in the life of the nation. When the COVID showed up, churches throughout Christendom were deemed non-essential, which is an odd way of looking at it, because a transcendent meaning to life is essential to every society. Something beyond the mere present tense, especially when the present tense, the mere here and now, is getting shorter. According to analysts at the Royal Bank of Canada, I have no idea why they were studying this, but according to those analysts, life expectancy in the UK has fallen by 9 months. Could be the COVID, could be the undiagnosed cancers, and all the rest of it. If it's any consolation to the actuarially challenged denizens of these islands, depressed by that statistic, in America, it's even worse. During 2020, US life expectancy fell by nearly 2 years. Could be the COVID, could be the soaring rates of drug deaths and teen suicides, maybe mental health issues more generally. So you would think a society in a slough of despond, in and out of lockdown for almost 2 years, would be a grand opportunity for Christian ministry. Instead, the church meekly accepted their designation as non-essential. They stuck laminated notices on the church doors saying, "Don't even think of praying here." And according to Douglas Murray in The Spectator, actually encouraged the government to close them down. In the fullness of time, the garden centres reopened, the pubs reopened, but churches didn't. Do you know your Magna Carta? You don't have to go too far deeply into this rather dense text. We're dealing with the very first article here. "We have granted to God, and by this our present charter have confirmed for us and our heirs forever, that the Church of England shall be free and shall have all her whole rights and liberties inviolable." The relationship between church and state as delineated 800 years ago. The King didn't say that ye old garden centre, just off the bypass, take the third left off the mini roundabout, shall be free and have all her rights and liberties inviolable. He said the church. In part because of our lack of faith, Britain, like most of Western Europe these days, is an ageing society, and the Church of England's remaining congregants are more elderly still. They're lonely. The doctors complain that an extraordinary proportion of face-to-face appointments are with frequent attendees who go to the surgery principally because they're lonely. What better time for the church to say, you may be socially distant, but you're spiritually connected? Instead, Church of England bishops put worship into lockdown, and we heard not a peep from them, except for the usual club-footed attempts to cut themselves a piece of the news cycle. So a whole bunch of C of E bigwigs decided to weigh in on what's name? Dominic Cummings? Remember the guy? He drove his kid to his grandparents. Everyone went bonkers. And suddenly the mute panjandrums of the established church rose as one to denounce Cummings for his offences against lockdown. Other than that, it's just been the usual interventions to show how trendy and groovy and with it they are. So when George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis, the Archbishop of Canterbury came to in Lambeth Palace and denounced his own church for its appalling institutional racism. If a church isn't even open, does it matter that it's institutionally racist? It's just being institutionally racist to itself. Nobody else need be involved. As I said, an opportunity missed. Tens of millions of people stuck at home with nothing but meretricious drivel from their streaming services. Granny's dead in the old folks' home, denied human contact for the last 3 months of her life. Your kid's semi-suicidal. The bloke next door missed his stage 2 cancer appointment, and now it's stage 4. And sure, you're doing okay, could be worse. But sitting around the flat for months on end, having exhausted the dregs of your Netflix subscription, you start thinking, well, maybe there's more to life. Maybe there's a higher purpose. Because the lower purpose, which is waiting for Boris to say, OK, you can switch off Netflix now and go outside for half an hour of exercise in the park, is about as low as it can get. But no, for 2 years, the church has been yet another of the dogs that didn't bark. There are, however, occasional exceptions to that general rule. Ladies and gentlemen, the Reverend William Pearson G. last Sunday.
Before we go on, I just wanted to say I spent 2 days last week batting off emails about whether we should close the church, cancel the services, and all the rest of it. And I just wanted to speak to you from my heart. We are not a cinema. We are not the O2 Arena. We are not a football match. We're not going to play by those rules. We are a family of brothers and sisters in Christ who come together on a Sunday to worship the living Jesus Christ. Not a football match, not a film, nothing like that. I am not going to close our services until I am ordered by law to do so. And even if that happens, it will be screaming and kicking. Because we're not an entertainment venue. We are here to worship the God who is sovereign over all of this mess, over all the ineptitude that the government can throw at us. And it is all the more important that we gather together as brothers and sisters in Christ to worship God.
We are not a cinema. Christmas service is not a screening of X-Men 37. Sad that that even needs to be said. What do you think? Should the bishops and archbishops show a bit of the spirit of Buckingham? Let me know your take at GBViews at gbnews.uk or on Twitter at GBNews. The Reverend Mr. Pearson G., rector of Buckingham Church, joins me now. I get the impression from that clip that this had been sort of building up in you for quite a while?
You're absolutely right, and thank you for having me on the show. I think it was hugely frustrating what happened early on in the lockdown, and I just want to say I think the church did drop the ball, and it's not really my place to apologise for it, but for what it's worth, we're really sorry that the churches were closed. We were given an open door by the government, particularly to live stream. But I think, as your introduction said, the House of Bishops decided that actually, no, we should go the extra mile and close. And I do feel that that decision is now deeply regretted. But the good news is, although the doors were closed, we did manage to achieve a huge amount over the lockdown in terms of our outreach, delivering free meals, bags of happiness, as they were called. Also, although the buildings were closed, we were still very busy.
The buildings are important, though. I mean, I'm sure you're tired of people saying this to you, because people have certainly been tweeting it at various governments that have closed churches down. But the Bible is full of references that say religion and religious faith is something you do together. Even if they could have anticipated Zoom calls in the Old Testament and the New Testament, they didn't believe that you could build a church on a Zoom call.
That's absolutely right. And Zoom was fantastic because we had no other option at that time if we were to stick within the guidelines and the law as we were told it was. But I think the magic has gone from Zoom. I think people have understood that for that time when we really didn't know what was going on in the pandemic, there was even more fear than there is being stirred up now. It was a good solution for that time. I think people can see past that now. People crave interaction. As your introduction quite rightly said, there's a pandemic of loneliness out there. And interestingly, it's been the more elderly people in our congregation who have been the trailblazers back to church. They're the ones that are showing the Dunkirk spirit. They've had enough of sitting at home self-isolating. They want to come back and meet people, see their friends, and worship Jesus.
Let me ask you a kind of bigger question in a way, because I heard what the Archbishop of Canterbury said about, people who are unvaccinated are immoral. And I don't know what else he thinks. I can't remember the last time he said that, sex outside marriage or anything like that was immoral. I don't want to beat up on him. But I don't think anybody needs as I said, a church that wants to get itself in the daily paper. The church is supposed to be for things that are beyond the daily paper. It seems to me there's an obvious crisis of faith, not just in Britain, but throughout most of what we used to quaintly call Christendom, and that the last 2 years would have been actually a good time to connect with people and actually to sit down and think about the larger meaning of life and society and the world.
I think you're absolutely right. I think Justin Welby, though, has an impossible job to do. He's a wonderful, wonderful man doing a job that he didn't volunteer to do. I probably, if I had been the Archbishop of Canterbury, would have focused on perhaps other things. I don't think it is immoral not to be vaccinated. I think our vaccination status is a private medical healthcare issue. I think if you start accusing people of not loving their neighbor for not being vaccinated, it's the thin end of a wedge. And, you can argue that people who eat too much and render themselves very obese and are therefore a huge drain on the NHS are perhaps also not loving their neighbour. So I wouldn't have got there. And I think the messaging we've had throughout the pandemic has been a drip, drip, drip of be careful, don't do this, you can't do that. And what we haven't heard enough of is the good news of Jesus Christ, the hope and assurance of eternal life that those who believe in him have. And what an incredible antidote to the hopelessness of the world being a Christian is.
Yeah, that's absolutely the Christian message. You do need human beings to preach it, though, and it looks as if the government or governments, because it's already starting to happen in Northern Ireland, are planning around Boxing Day, Christmas Bank Holiday Monday to do what you were warning about and start imposing lockdowns on public gatherings and bringing back the rule of 6 or whatever it's called and all the rest of it. Do you fear your message in that little viral clip might become a self-fulfilling prophecy now?
I doubt many church leaders are going to toe the line this time round. And what really affected me is I visited Baghdad, the Anglican church in Baghdad in 2019, and I met some of the relations of some Iraqi men who'd converted to Christianity, and they were warned, if you come to church, you could be picked up on your way back by one of the groups, and you could lose your life. And sure enough, 6 of them were picked up, tortured, and executed, having been warned that coming to church was dangerous. That is how seriously those people took coming together, as Hebrews tells us, we must never give up on meeting together. And that, to me, is such a reminder of how precious it is of our ability here in the West. Largely, it's completely safe coming to church to worship. And I suspect there will be wide-scale civil disobedience if they close our churches down again.
Well, I thank you for mentioning that, because that is true not only of Anglican worshippers in Baghdad, but in Pakistan and Nigeria and Egypt and in many places of the world where people get up and go to church on Sunday morning even though they know those churches could be firebombed and all the rest of it. Their Christian faith is strong in those parts of the world, and we'd only have to show a 20th, a 50th, a 70th of that by going to church in defiance of government diktats. Thank you so much for that video, and thank you so much for reminding us of what you saw of the beleaguered Christian community in Baghdad. And a Merry Christmas to you and your flock, Rector. Coming up, on a related theme, the psychological toll of COVID, and I'm going to be talking pints with the former Chief of the General Staff, that's the head of the Army, as you know, Lord Danner. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. A lot of cloud around for this coming night. As a result of this, a little bit less cold than it's been recently, particularly in the south. There is some rain around, and the air's still cold enough, though, for some ice across Scotland as this rain mingles with colder air here. Some snow, too, for the mountains of northern Scotland. Elsewhere, though, any early evening rain should soon clear away to leave a lot of cloud around. 1 or 2 clear spells for central and eastern England, but a good deal of cloudy grey weather to start Thursday morning. And after an early dip in temperatures across the east, well, those temperatures generally coming up from the west, so not as cold, particularly in the south, compared to last night. So it will be a fairly grey start to Thursday morning. Still some rain across parts of Scotland. This will tend to fizzle out for a time before being boosted by the next weather front coming in from the southwest. So quite a wet day to come for Scotland. Some rain too for Northern Ireland and for Northern England, but rain elsewhere across England and Wales, not really amounting to too much. And as the rain clears, we see some milder air coming into the southwest. So temperatures here, 11, 12, 13 degrees on Thursday afternoon. Still on the chilly side, though, in and to the north of this rain band. And the air certainly cold enough for across Scotland on Thursday night into Christmas Eve morning for some quite significant snowfall across the mountains, so something to bear in mind if you're travelling here. Elsewhere, though, into Christmas Eve morning, the rain will clear through. We're left with clear spells, but a lot of damp ground, so potentially some fog patches forming, but it won't be as cold for most of us as it has been for some recent nights. So Christmas Eve could start quite grey, quite foggy across central southern England. The fog here will take its time to clear on Christmas Eve morning. So again, bear that in mind if you have Christmas travel plans. But the fog will lift from the west as this next band of rain comes in from the west. Some quite heavy rain for parts of southwest England, Wales into Northern Ireland. A drier day for Scotland. Scotland still in the colder air ahead of this weather front. And this sets the scene then as we move into Christmas Day. We've got cold air to the north and east of the UK, milder air trying to push into the south. Where these weather fronts separate the dividing line, well, that's where we've got the greatest chance of seeing snow. So quite an unsettled picture, so certainly some rain around at times. With some quite low temperatures in the north, here we've got the chance of some snow too.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Welcome back to Farage. Let's go to your comments. We have this from Gareth via GB Views, who says the Archbishop of Canterbury shows no compassion towards the nurses who are on the front line of the COVID pandemic with no PPE. Some of those same nurses will lose their jobs in April because they are unvaxxed. The man, this would be the Archbishop, is not fit to wear that cloth. He said being unvaxxed is immoral, and as Gareth has pointed out, that includes then, the immoral include many of those nurses who are on the front lines and risking their own lives. Jesus, as you may recall from Scripture, cleansed the lepers. These nurses were also the people who were cleansing the lepers in treating the COVID patients when they didn't have PPE or anything, but now the Archbishop of Canterbury is excoriating the latter-day leper cleansers. Mark says via GB News, bishops here in Scotland took Nicola Sturgeon and her government to court re church closures, and the judge ruled in favour of the bishops and that closing churches were unlawful. Of course, this wasn't widely reported on Scottish media as they are part of Sturgeon's propaganda machine. Especially STV. Well, that was your first mistake, Mark. You shouldn't be watching STV. Anyway, keep it on GB News. But you're right. This can't withstand legal scrutiny. This war on freedom of religion and freedom of worship under the guise of COVID lockdowns. Tony, via GB Views, says, "What an inspiration this man is, and we all need to rise up against the continued tyranny and psychological campaign of fear." Yeah, you can't have a permanent emergency that shuts down core liberties, including freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom of religion. You can't have that. You can't have a permanent emergency on core liberties, because that's a tyranny. Peter says via GB News, "I'm 80 years old and am just getting by with keeping safe. My wife and I follow the rules without a problem. We do not need any religion, as we see that if God is all powerful, why do we have to have this awful disease? There is obviously no God. I was born in the war and we just got on with it as we do now. Just tell people to stop whining and get on with it." Well, we need a longer discussion if you're going to argue about whether there is or there is no God. But a transcendent meaning to society is important even for atheists, because you have to have some purpose to society other than just watching lousy telly. And as we see with the collapsed birth rates, apart from anything else, in Western Europe, Europe's basically given up on a future. It's built the so-called EU utopia, and then it's got these deathbed demographic fertility rates that basically say, we love our perfect Euro society, but not enough to want to keep it going beyond one generation. And you need some kind of transcendent meaning for that. And in fact, my guest, he's now the rector of Buckingham Church. The reason he became a minister was because of a terrible tragedy that happened to him, in which he lost his wife and son in a car crash. A terrible story. But he doesn't think of God in that reductive sense, that there can't be any God because there was a tornado in the American Midwest on Thursday that killed some few dozen people. That's not how God works. We have human agency, Peter, and even atheists prosper in a society that believes in something a little beyond the present tense. Okay, where are we going now? Oh, we were talking at the top of the show about loneliness among the elderly. But these last couple of years have been even worse for the young. In America, by the spring of this year, this is a horrifying statistic, always shocks me. Suicide attempts by girls from 12 to 17 were up over 50% on 2019. In the UK, a study has found that 7% of youth have attempted suicide by the age of 17. That's a staggering number. So who knows what will happen? We hinted in the previous segment at Northern Ireland and Wales and other parts of the United Kingdom already introducing various kinds of semi-lockdowns to kick in on Boxing Day. So what will happen if kids are kept from their classrooms again by a post-Christmas lockdown? My next guest was called a conspiracy theorist for predicting vaccine passports were on their way. Now they're the new normal, and as the Archbishop says, if you don't want to go along with that, you're immoral. And she's also been sounding the alarm about the effects of lockdown on mental health. The psychologist Emma Kenny joins me. Emma, it's great to see you. But this is these last 2 years have done terrible damage to the youth all around Britain and the rest of the Western world.
Definitely. I mean, the whole premise in the UK of safeguarding children is to protect them from harm, abuse and neglect. And I've said pretty much from the day one that we started locking down that we're actually creating more harm, abuse and neglect than we'd ever seen for our young population. You've just highlighted statistics that are incredibly scary for us to listen to as adults. We want to be protecting children. But also Mind, they've done a lot of research. They've found that 9 out of 10 young people are feeling more lonely than they've ever felt, that 30% of young people feel significantly more unhappy than they did pre-lockdown. And actually 58% of people who are on benefits are saying that they feel significantly more depressed than they did before. So this is a global issue, obviously, it's affecting the whole world. But as far as the Western-centric model that you were just reporting to a moment ago, definitely we are faring terribly, and 25% issues increasing with development problems in children. So they're struggling because they can't see faces, schools aren't consistent. Obviously, the way that the world feels is incredibly different sensorily. So these are huge problems. And I think there's been lots of psychologists, lots of therapists who maybe have tried to get the message out there. But with respect, it's not a landscape at the moment professionally that's very easy to speak out, because the minute that you do, you either get branded with some kind of very divisive label, which makes it easy to dismiss you, or you get threatened. It's as simple as that. You literally get threatened by your professional bodies. So it's very difficult.
Are you surprised by that? Because you've been threatened and you've been sneered at for being an anti-vaxxer and all this kind of thing. Whereas it would seem perfectly obvious, for example, that if we're talking about mental health issues, I was listening on the radio as I was driving into a mother saying that her one-year-old had just become phenomenally depressed and desocialized through the COVID lockdown. These aren't sophisticated concepts. Asking children, asking 5- and 6-year-olds to learn while they're masked and they can't interact with their friends. Why is the state's response that if you disagree with us, as you do, you have to be crushed like a bug so nobody else tries to join in on that kind of talk?
Well, I suppose that if you create a whole set of circumstances that very much seem illogical to somebody when you just explore the reality of that logic, if that's so obvious when you start doing that, you need to be able to crush those who point it out and make them seen either like they are conspiracy theorists or liars or anti-scientific or indeed anti-vaccine, which is so ironic for somebody who's had lots of vaccine to be branded that way. But it's a very clever typology psychologically. If we can make people afraid of things that are very logical being stated, then we can ensure that control is far greater than it would be ordinarily, because it means that people say, well, it would make sense for me to talk about this because it's logical. As you've just said, parents are talking about depressed children, suicide rates in young people are up. But then if I speak that out and then I get called a murderer because essentially somebody could get COVID and die, that is very illogical, but also very scary. So I think that's why. And mental health per se in the UK, look, we've been struggling for a long time. And it was so interesting listening to you talking about the need to believe in something greater and the need to have purpose. I think fundamentally science for a long time has destroyed the idea of there even being a God, and it's deconstructed our connection with higher purpose, whether you believe in that or otherwise. What we certainly have seen in the past year to 2 years is actually people have belonged a little bit. You know, I don't feel angry with people who feel very pro-lockdown and very pro-particular sets of data that I might not disagree. I agree with. And what I see there is that they want to believe in something, and there has been connection, there has been community. People have felt that they've looked after each other. Like you said, when you're searching for something to believe in, those are really important things. And maybe we need to be looking at our society and saying, what do we need to learn from this? We need to do better to support each other, but also to hear each other's points of view and to work as a society and community. That's good for mental health and for children. But let's stop threatening people who are terrified about the impact long term of mental health on our society being so distorted and destroyed.
Well, amen to that, Emma. And you have made an absolutely brilliant point there, which is that I think just the longer it goes on, there are tens, hundreds of millions of people around the Western world who think of the state's COVID regime as a kind of established church, as the new church, as the new religion. And actually moving on from that and getting beyond that is going to be quite a challenge for all of us. Thank you very much for that, Emma. Cracking stuff, and I'm glad you were able to join us. And a Merry Christmas to you. And now, what the Farage? First up, do you like all these pregnant men popping up all over what we used to call the maternity ward? A trans man who gave birth to a wee bonny bouncing, well, whatever gender is yet to be assigned. Anyway, the trans man, Bennett Casper Williams, is furious with hospital staff who kept referring to him as the child's mother, even though he has a full beard. Although that's a bit transphobic of him, because there's no reason a fine-looking woman shouldn't have a full beard. Personally, I like a woman with a splendid pair of mutton chops and a handlebar moustache. Mr. Casper Williams says these healthcare haters should stop insisting that pregnancy is anything to do with being a woman. Just because he had a baby in his uterus doesn't mean he's a mother. If you think, quote, his uterus has an odd ring to it, get with the beat. A mere 3 decades back, we used to have fusses about controversial books like Heather has 2 mommies, and now Heather requires no mommies whatsoever, and you're a transphobe if you suggest otherwise. I may get pregnant myself, although my biological clock is running down. Incidentally, Madame Macron, the wife of the French president, is suing a political website for saying she's transgender. She points out that she gave birth to 3 children, although, as we all know, she could have done that as a pregnant man. You know, if I had to bet, I'd have said it was the other one in the Macron couple who was the transgender one. Actually, I might as well reveal this. The entire G7 leadership is transgender, you know. I knew Boris Johnson back when he was playing Violet Elizabeth Bott in Just William. The charity Barnardo's is revealing its strangest donations of the year. They include a scorpion, a set of false teeth, and a slice of pizza. Put the teeth in, throw the scorpion on top of the pepperoni and cheese, and you're all set for Boxing Day. There was also a bag of infants' clothes with a dried umbilical cord. Not sure which father they cut that off from. A pot with 9 human molars and a urethral catheter. So let me see, a scorpion, false teeth, slice of pizza, old umbilical cord, urethral catheter, used toilet brush, and an animal castration tool. Hey, good to know I can do all my Christmas shopping in one place. Thank you, Barnardo's. Finally, the British Board of Film Classification is re-rating decades-old films to, quote, keep in step with the direction on which society is moving. If you're wondering what direction that is, it's straight over the cliff. Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, used to be rated U. but now requires parental guidance because Darth Vader chopping off Luke Skywalker's hand is apparently unsuitable for children. It should, of course, be banned entirely because the Empire has no business striking back. It should be cancelling itself for its dirty, rotten imperialism. Jaws got restricted because of those frightening shark attack scenes. It was basically like as vicious and violent as a Twitter mob rising up to attack J.K. Rowling. So we can't have that. One of the Lord of the Rings movies got bumped up to 12A because of, quote, regular scenes of fantasy battle involving stabbing, slashing, and arrow impacts. Oh, just a minute. Breaking news. Singing in the Rain has just been up to XXX because it features actors who are capable of singing and dancing without the benefit of $500 million worth of CGI in post-production. And that's too disturbing a concept for contemporary audiences to grasp. Coming up, we're going to talk to General Lord Dannett, former Chief of the General Staff. Also, no Farage to Barrage, so do stump the Steyn instead. You can ask me anything. GBViews at gbnews.uk or via Twitter at GBNews. That's all straight ahead after Lord Dannett. Coming up.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
GBViews at gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back to Farage. The pubs will soon be shut down anyway, so we're conducting talking points virtually. And with me is Lord Dannett, former head of the British Army, Chief of the General Staff. It doesn't really have as cute an acronym as it used to do in the days when they were known as SIGs, for old school imperialists like me, Chief of the Imperial General Staff. They need a vowel in the less imperial title. But we're glad that Lord Dannett could join us. And while we're imperially messing about, let me just ask you a bit about Afghanistan, because you were involved in that very much in the early years of the thankless unwon wars of the 21st century. And after the fiasco, which I think it was, at least as far as America's enemies were concerned, there was a lot of the commentary was that, oh, well, it was fatalistic. Oh, well, this is Afghanistan, graveyard of empire, ask the British, ask the Russians. In other words, that this was destined to be the way it was. You knew those early years very well, including on the ground. Did it have to end this way?
No, it didn't have to end that way at all. I think the great sadness, the tragedy of what had been worked really hard on in the 20 years since 9/11 was that Afghan civil society had really begun to make progress. If that was not the case, why would there be 270 female judges, for example, in Afghanistan? No, the real tragedy is that Donald Trump decided that he wanted to get America out of its forever war. Joe Biden campaigned on that, and ending the forever war was a bit of a bumper sticker. And he converted a bumper sticker into a policy, and then lo and behold, this August they pulled the plug. And the real tragedy is that the very small international force that was still in Afghanistan and hadn't lost a soldier killed in action for 18 months was supporting the Afghan security forces. They were containing the Taliban, and meanwhile Afghan civil society was improving and growing all the time. And all that was swept away on the whim of President Biden, honouring the agreement that Donald Trump had made with the Taliban back early last year. And that's the real tragedy. And of course, it's a real tragedy for the people of Afghanistan now. 23 million people there, most of whom are on the breadline, starving, and it just did not need to be like that. A real opportunity to do something good in the world was wasted. Joe Biden will find he'll struggle to go anywhere upwards in my estimation.
Well, as you pointed out, there's a kind of bipartisan antipathy and indifference to these wars. It's very hard to conduct a long-term war when the people back home just shrug and give up on it and regard it as a downer, and they don't want it in their news bulletins anymore. You dealt with this in a certain sense as Chief of the General Staff, because you were very concerned that you should be known, your face should be known, you should be out there interacting in the media. But if the public just say, nah, this is like a movie that's gone on too long, I'm bored, see what else is on, what do you do about that?
Well, you put your finger on a very real problem, and we've seen it in many campaigns, not just British campaigns, but the Vietnam War, for example, the United States. When the public at home loses interest and loses support in the campaign that the military is conducting, that's a really major factor which plays on governments' minds, which decides for them that they want to bring this to a conclusion. And of course, these counterinsurgency operations are all about people. They're not about winning or losing. They're all about persuading the population in a given country. And I seen it in Bosnia, I've seen it in Kosovo, we've seen it in Iraq and Afghanistan, that actually they want to follow a certain course of action. And that's what you have to play to the internal media in the country in which you're operating. But then the other audience is the audience back home, to make sure that the audience back home, people in this country, in the United Kingdom, still support the campaign that's going on. And those are the two things that governments really have to keep in mind. Winning the campaign, the hearts and minds, if you like, of the people in the country in which you're operating, but also maintaining the support of the people back home to say, well, actually, this is worth doing. And although we're taking some casualties, in Iraq, we lost 179 of our people. In Afghanistan, 457. That's a huge price to pay. But in fact, a lot was being achieved and could still well have been achieved if President Biden hadn't swept that away in August this year.
Do you think that has damaged the credibility of the United States with serious foreign actors? By which I mean China, who are reported already to be poking around Bagram Air Base, for example. Do you think that China, Russia, the Iranians look on America as a paper tiger? It accounts for 40% of global military spending, but it's managed to hand Afghanistan back to the Taliban with more territory than they had 20 years ago. Is there a credibility issue there?
I think you've got it in one there, and I think the West is standing in danger and has stood in danger for quite some time with weak leadership from the United States. It started with Barack Obama, who said he wanted to be the president that would end wars, not start them. That's a noble a noble desire. Continue with Donald Trump, who frankly no one really quite knew what he was on about, and Joe Biden. Well, I've already talked about Joe Biden. But what the West needs is strong leadership from the United States. And what Vladimir Putin has seen is that the West is pretty weak, so he's pushing in Ukraine, he's pushing up in the Baltics. What China is seeing is that America is lacking in leadership. So they're pushing in Hong Kong, they're pushing in Taiwan, and Iran on the nuclear deal. Are they really worried about us taking further action? No, they're not. The West is standing in danger at the present moment. And part of that, the significant part of that danger is that we're not seeing sufficient leadership from the United States to lead the Western world in a strong and determined fashion, not to dominate other people, but just to defend our own values, our own territory, our own way of life, from threats such as from Russia, from China, and from Iran.
Well, we shouldn't just beat up on US presidents. Your book was fairly excoriating of the political leadership in Downing Street in the early years of these wars. They're seen perhaps by the public as Tony Blair's wars, certainly Iraq is. It was Gordon Brown by the time you became head of the army. What is the role for a second-rank power such as the United Kingdom? Is it just to follow the Americans into whatever quote-unquote NATO mission they decide to go for? Or is there a meaningful independent role for the British Armed Forces?
Oh, well, you asked two questions there, and your last comment changes it slightly. Is there a role for the United Kingdom? Well, the answer is yes, there is a role for the United Kingdom. Because don't forget, as I'm sure you're not, that the United Kingdom is one of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. That's a huge responsibility placed on us. And of course, we're a member of the G7, we're a member of the G20, and within the British dominated part of the world, not dominated is the wrong word, we are the leading nation within the Commonwealth. So the UK has a strong leadership role, and when you've got a strong leadership role, you have responsibilities, and we need to discharge those responsibilities in a sensible fashion, which means that we need to seek influence in the world. We can seek influence through our diplomatic skills, they're widely recognized. We can seek influence through our military capabilities, which are not as strong as they were, not as strong as they should be, and also the focused use of our development budget. And again, I'm one of those who opposes the fact that we've cut our overseas development budget from 0.7% of GDP to 0.5%. And that's the wrong thing to have done. I know there's a pandemic, and I know that the Chancellor has got to find lots of money for other really important things. But actually, if Global Britain, which is what Boris and others actually want to make a reality of, we've got to have influence through our diplomatic skills, our military capability, and also through the focused use of a decent amount of international aid. Then Britain can have a role in the world, can be Global Britain, and do something really useful. That's something to celebrate, something to work for, and not something to be embarrassed about.
Well, you mentioned the Commonwealth just now. You presided over what I think was the biggest British military exercise since the end of the Cold War 30 years ago at the British training base. It's a bit of a misnomer to call it a base because it's kind of like as big as some countries in Canada. Do you think those Commonwealth and I was always told by friends who joined the Canadian or the Australian military or whatever that there were very real and meaningful relationships between the various of the Queen's armies. Do you think those relationships are still real and active today? I mean, they're not alliances. They're not like NATO in a sense because they're assumed to be family, so they just are. Is that still a thing these days?
Very much so. Our military relationships with a large number of countries, and certainly some of our European partners, our military-to-military relationship with the French and with the Germans and with the Italians actually is very good. But it's very special with Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and a number of the Caribbean countries, all those countries that have been part of, well, previously the British Empire, previously were colonies of ours, but now we're all equal partners within the Commonwealth. There's a very special relationship there. When I was Commander of British Forces in Bosnia in the mid-90s, I had Kiwi Company under command, 120 New Zealanders, who were fantastic soldiers, and they were really pleased and proud to be part of the international force that the UK was part of. And you mentioned Canada. We've been training in Canada since 1972 on a huge part of the prairies, which most of the armoured warfare expertise the British Army has gained over the last 50 years has come from the prairies in Alberta. So our relationships are very good, and we enjoy those relationships. And I think that's something to be celebrated.
Well, thank you for that. I think that will be reassuring to a lot of people, Lord Dannett, and thank you very much for sharing your insights. Yeah, you want to say one more thing? Go ahead.
I was a guest at the Adelaide Test match in 2006, and the chairman of the cricket club, in the lunch interval, said, "I'd like to welcome our guests. I'd like to welcome General Sir Richard Dannett, the Chief of the Imperial General Staff." Well, if the Aussies wanted to consider me still Chief of the Imperial General Staff, crack on, I thought. I don't mind at all.
Well,
just to go back to your opening comment.
Yeah, and I think we let's just for the sake of those people in Adelaide, let's go back to that title. Thank you to the former Chief of the Imperial General Staff, Lord Dannett. Yeah, you shouldn't be so shy about these titles, folks. Let's get it back out there. Come on, Boris, Chief of the Imperial General Staff. Let's say it loud. Okay, time for Barrows the Farage. Okay, Geordie says, why does Rishi always ignore the UK tourism sector with handouts until last? Well, somebody has to be last because everybody needs a handout. That's the magnificent state of the economy. Peter via Twitter asks, how would you increase the NHS bed capacity as they never have enough to meet any winter crisis? Well, I think we need to have a photo op at a medical bed factory with Boris standing there in a white coat. And finally, Robert says, why is the price of fuel still high while a barrel of oil has dropped weeks ago? It's all still sitting on a container ship off the coast of Rockall somewhere. That is it for us. I'm being a bit cynical. Alistair Stewart will do it for you. He's not the least bit cynical, and he's going to be here after the weather. See you tomorrow.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. A lot of cloud around for this coming night. As a result of this, a little bit less cold than it's been recently, particularly in the south. There is some rain around, and the air's still cold enough, though, for some ice across Scotland as this rain mingles with colder air here. Some snow, too, for the mountains of northern Scotland. Elsewhere, though, any early evening rain should soon clear away to leave a lot of cloud around. 1 or 2 clear spells for central and eastern England, but a good deal of cloudy grey weather to start Thursday morning. And after an early dip in temperatures across the east, well, those temperatures generally coming up from the west, so not as cold, particularly in the south, compared to last night. So it will be a fairly grey start to Thursday morning. Still some rain across parts of Scotland. This will tend to fizzle out for a time before being boosted by the next weather front coming in from the southwest. So quite a wet day to come for Scotland. Some rain too for Northern Ireland and for Northern England, but rain elsewhere across England and Wales, not really amounting to too much. And as the rain clears, we see some milder air coming into the southwest. So temperatures here, 11, 12, 13 degrees on Thursday afternoon. Still on the chilly side, though, in and to the north of this rain band. And the air certainly cold enough for across Scotland on Thursday night into Christmas Eve morning for some quite significant snowfall across the mountains, so something to bear in mind if you're travelling here. Elsewhere, though, into Christmas Eve morning, the rain will clear through. We're left with clear spells, but a lot of damp ground, so potentially some fog patches forming, but it won't be as cold for most of us as it has been for some recent nights. So Christmas Eve could start quite grey, quite foggy across central southern England. The fog here will take its time to clear on Christmas Eve morning. So again, bear that in mind if you have Christmas travel plans. But the fog will lift from the west as this next band of rain comes in from the west. Some quite heavy rain for parts of southwest England, Wales into Northern Ireland. A drier day for Scotland. Scotland still in the colder air ahead of this weather front, and this sets the scene then as we move into Christmas Day. We've got cold air to the north and east of the UK, milder air trying to push into the south. Where these weather fronts separate the dividing line, well, that's where we've got the greatest chance of seeing snow. So quite an unsettled picture, so certainly some rain around at times, with some quite low temperatures in the north. Here we've got the chance of some snow too.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part